I just want to start with a couple of acknowledgements before I get into talking about the project and myself. So, really, this could not have come together without the incredible privilege I had to engage with a lot of public archives across central and western New York. So, I owe a lot of thank yous to different people who will come up throughout the presentation, and also with respect to this project, I just want to acknowledge, because this project is very much about land stewardship, but also ownership and dispossession, that we are gathered on the traditional homelands of the Seneca and Cayuga nations, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who stewarded this land before many of the institutional forces that gave me the privilege to make this work, including the forces that were behind the construction of the Army Depot itself, came to this land. I also want to thank Laura Rowley for inviting me to share this project. As a public archive on a site so local to this town and this library, it really feels like it's completing a life cycle to have it here and to be able to share it with people that also live locally. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who came out. So my name is Bradley Verhelle. I was born in Rochester, New York, and I recently finished school at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. So I've sort of been on two opposing sides of this site. It dominated my commute to and from home for many years. I work in the environmental humanities, and most of my work is really focused on resource extraction, environmental remediation, and of course land stewardship and ownership. As I mentioned, I'm a photographic printmaker, which means I mostly work in antiquated or alternative processes in the darkroom or in printmaking, and am very interested in working with found material in the archive, including maps, photographs, documents, manuscripts. So all of those sorts of bits and pieces came together to make this project. So I also want to preface that though I did not grow up very close to the Seneca Army Depot, there were a lot of sort of signs and features of the land that informed how I came to understand it. One of the biggest ones was also what informed placing the Seneca Army Depot where it is today, which is the Lehigh Valley Railroad. I grew up walking down the rail trail in Mendon, New York to go to church or to go get ice cream in the morning, all those sorts of little things, and it's something that I just experienced and lived with every day without knowing it had such a deep connection to the Seneca Army Depot. And also my parents spent some time in Trumansburg and Ithaca, and so I have a lot of experience driving back and forth between and across the Seneca Army Depot. Even seeing the Whittier or learning bits and pieces about what it might be, or forming some of those pieces of knowledge myself. Driving past the barbed wire fence at one point, it occurred to me that this site was a prison in some way. There's some truth to that, certainly, and that the 5 Points Correctional Facility is on that land, but younger me didn't understand that it's pretty unlikely to have a prison about the same size as Manhattan in rural New York. So another deep interest in exploration of this project was figuring out what those urban and rural mythologies that came about from experiencing the site in bits and pieces through archives, how that sort of forms a cultural and cumulative knowledge for people that live in the region. Alright. So it wasn't until I came across the Environmental Protection Agency's Superfund site profile that I really started to take an analytical approach to my experience of Seneca Army Depot. I started to investigate it. I had been looking at other Superfund sites, namely Canal, up in Niagara Falls, which was the original Superfund, for those of you who don't know, which is just a national government act for remediating land that has been tainted in some way, usually by PFAS or forever chemicals, much like the Seneca Army Depot has been. And so this is where I got a sense of not only what the scope of the site was, which you can see here, it's over 10,000 acres, 10,587 acres, but also what the site was originally used for, that it was a military base, a munitions storage facility, and all of the sort of offshootings of what it is today. So this is, for those of you who live close by, hopefully you recognize that this right up here is Lodi. This is a map from 1938 to 1939. So it came about through a library grant at Olin Library at Cornell University to make these publicly accessible maps through the agriculture school and through aerial photography to document and survey the land in central New York. So Seneca County, among other neighboring counties, were all documented, and this is one of many snapshots that came about. You'll notice that this was taken in '38, so it's just before World War II, which means the Seneca Army Depot hadn't been constructed yet. I'm not sure everyone has gotten a chance to see quite yet, but part of the installation is at the front desk of the library. It consists of a series of these maps layered in a sort of topographic style, but instead of looking at the topography, it's looking more closely at how the region has changed from the years. This map was made in 1938 to 39, and then the following maps are 1954, 1963, and then two GIS maps from 1994 and 2023. So you'll see that this map from 1938 to 39 layers perfectly over this map from 1963, and if you go back and forth a little bit, you'll notice that all of the roads seem to be in roughly the same place. Because the maps are made in cross sections and they were shot analog by flying over the region and shooting down, there's some misalignment and overlaps that don't seem quite right. But for the most part, you can get a sense of this is the land that the Seneca Army Depot was installed on, and this is the Seneca Army Depot as it was in 1963. So one of the really exciting parts about layering these maps is that you can actually see that the tree lines from a lot of the old properties and farmlands in the region are still in these regions. You can see these tree lines haven't gone away. The Department of War at the time bulldozed pretty much every house in the region after dispossessing farmers of their land in 1941, just shortly before they got into World War II. Because we got into World War II so quickly, what happened was the government sent out letters to people who owned farms in this region that they wanted to place the Seneca Army Depot on. They wanted to put the Army Depot here because of the railroad access that it has. It'd be very easy to ship containers of materials, ammunition, bombs throughout the region, and let them know that they were going to be, they had to move off their land, that they were going to be paid X amount of money for their house, or their farm, the rest of their land. Usually that amount of money was not, for the most part, really fair to people who lived in these spaces. Many of them were people who had lived on these farms for many generations. And then because we were approaching the war so quickly, the amount of time that they were given to move out changed very quickly and very drastically as the war approached. So some people were given as little as 3 days to move all of their belongings, everything from their house to somewhere else, wherever that might be. And so many people relocated and found new farmland in the region, in the county, or otherwise somewhat close by. But this really negatively affected a lot of people in the region. Let's see. So, as the Army Depot was constructed, this is a little bit early, but as the Army Depot was constructed, it produced a ton of jobs for people, so we were coming out of the Great Depression, and because everything was built so quickly, I believe almost all of the 500 concrete bunkers or igloos that were poured were constructed between August and November of that year in 1941. So there was a huge amount of manpower, incredibly fast. And I believe the number of people that were hired to work in this space at its peak was about 8,000, and it sort of quickly rise and fell, but a lot of people moved to the region because we were coming out of the Great Depression. People didn't have jobs, and the government was supplying this huge amount of money to people who were willing to relocate to help construct the Army Depot. And the depot continued to be a source of income. It was the largest employer in the region for the whole of the time that it operated. The second largest employer in the region, which is very close by, was the Simpson Naval Base and Air Force Base. The name changed very many times, but the hospital on that base, which ended up becoming the Willard State Hospital, was the second largest employer in the region, and so they were very linked just because everything that happened in this region had usually, was informed by either the war efforts for World War II or storing ammunition during the Cold War, and so this was a huge source of income for people who lived in this community at this time.
Bradley?
Yes.
In your research, did it happen to give any financial sense of how much they were paying people to incentivize them to come versus how much they paid people to take them off the land?
Yes. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but the book that Walter Gable and Carolyn Zog published, which is at the front desk right now in the installation, was put together by the county historian's office. They have a lot of those figures in there. They also have a really incredible map up. I think it's a permanent installation at the county historian's office where you can see all of the original property lines and names of the people who used to own land in the region before they were dispossessed. So a lot of this project was sort of pulling together bits and pieces from different archives and maybe not being able to dive deep enough to get the full story and the exact figures, but it's such a wide space and sort of branched off in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But thank you, yeah, and you can definitely find some of those figures in that book. But needless to say, the amount of money that the Army Depot was bringing into the region completely dwarfed the rest of the economy. And so, really, in some ways, was dominating all of Seneca County as far as jobs and employment went. The Army Depot operated from the beginning of World War II through about the early 90s, when the depot started to be dismantled and closed. The Army Depot began to sell some of its land before then, realizing that it didn't need quite as much space to keep its ammunition together while it wasn't moving quite as often. Around 1983, the Seneca Women's Encampment for Peace and Justice, for a future of peace and justice, launched a protest. This was in the summer of '83, and among the many things informing the protest was a concern that nuclear weapons were being stored at the Seneca Army Depot. Doing research on this, you sort of get a lot of different conflicting answers about whether there were nuclear weapons there, whether there weren't. But one thing that seems absolutely certain is that they did keep nuclear components of nuclear weapons there and hazardous waste from the Manhattan Project. So this was one of the earliest sites that the government stored these types of nuclear weapons and nuclear wastes in. And so, of course, at the time, given that nobody really knew these things, nobody knew, what was being kept in the Army Depot or what capacity these things were being kept in the Army Depot. There was a huge concern about security and safety for people who were raising their families here. And that was what largely informed these protests.
In the 1970s, my cousin's husband, who had a degree in nuclear engineering, would regularly come up to the Army Depot to do safety training.
Right. Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the sort of job applications for employment were also requesting people who had backgrounds in nuclear engineering to come and work. So there were a lot of signs that were pointing to nuclear weapons being stored here, but of course the official line from the United States government was that they, couldn't confirm or deny whether there were weapons stored in the region. Flashing forward a little bit, maybe better to start with this slide, but as the Army Depot started to settle in, it gave most of its land back to Seneca County, who realized they needed to sell it to people who could then begin to pay taxes on it so the county could start to reap money off of it. At the time the Army Depot closed in 1990 or 1991, I believe, the Willard State Hospital closed within about a year, so the two largest employers in the region had just not even collapsed really, it was just, they just sort of pulled out and left the region, left many jobless in the area. And so the county needed to sell a lot of this land back to someone who could begin to pay taxes on it, to make money on it, because a lot of people were facing hardship shortly after the depot closed. One of the things that was constructed at the end of the Army Depot's sort of repurposing and selling its land. This is one of the few parts that's still owned by the state, but it's the 5 Points prison. And another one, which is probably one of the better known ones, is Deer Haven Park, which is a deer conservation facility.
So Bradley, are you familiar with the housing down along the lake that's now Lakeshore Landing, where the Officers Club used to be?
Not super familiar, but I
had my wedding reception at the Officers Club.
Oh, wow.
My father was employed at the depot. So that housing part, all those projects were also sold off to big development, and they got a lot of money from that too. That would be a whole nother area if you were interested, though.
Yeah.
My father, actually with the Van Houten Company out of Geneva, they did all the construction and the contracting to keep those and maintain those houses for the depot people.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, it branches off in so many different ways, and it's such a massive area.
That would be one more beside the deer.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I also just want to talk about the history of the white deer, and this is another one of those sort of urban social legends or mythologies that develops around how they came about. So I talked with the county historian a lot about this history, and it, of course, there's a huge, given the history of nuclear weapons in the area, a lot of stories that were fabricated about, because this is a site of environmental remediation, these deer turned white somehow, or that. And of course, even if people don't believe that to be true, it's still sort of like an urban legend that people know about. And so that was a really interesting point of entry into this site for me, is that even if this was sort of like a falsity, it's something that people believe and an experience that people have about the deer, is that there was some sort of meddling that happened that caused them to turn white. And this is not entirely untrue, because at the height of the depot's operation, when people weren't getting in and out without permission, the population of deer in the depot just continued to breed and had no natural predators. And so both the leucistic white deer and the brown white-tailed deer blew up out of control and needed to be maimed by the military itself. And so it is my understanding that when the orders went out to maim the deer, they expressed, only maim the brown deer because these white ones are special. They have some quality about them that we don't want to kill them. And so this trait, which is recessive, which was causing the deer to turn white, sort of artificially caused a ton of them to turn white. And to this day, it's still the largest population of white deer in the world. I think at its height, the population was about 300, and now it's about 70 to 80, which is still really, really large just for the number of deer who carry this recessive trait, or express this recessive trait. There would be even more that carry the trait. Okay, so
So 300 down to 70 or 80, it's pretty significant.
yeah,
No,
Famine,
hunting.
hunting?
I think hunting was part of it. I think another part of it is that
Because that nobody was there to keep the hunters out. Yeah.
and it isn't legal to hunt them, but it definitely happens. And another reason I think the population thinned a little bit is that in addition to the hunting, when the deer were sort of allowed to move in and out of the Army Depot, they started to breed with the rest of the herd that was outside. And so all of these deer that didn't have this recessive leucistic trait means that all of these offspring of these deer also wouldn't have that trait. And so it's definitely still very present in the population, even in the brown deer who aren't expressing it. But I think for those two reasons, the herd thinned really quickly after the Army Depot closed, and after, before the land switched hands to Deer Haven Park, which wasn't until 2016. Right, so I want to, before I talk about the process of making the artwork, just briefly touch on all of the archives and material that I used to make this. So something that kept coming up throughout this talk is the county historian's office, which was a huge help. Pamela Becker, who's the historian there, has a close relationship with people who worked at the Army Depot, and also has just been doing an incredible job of really organizing all of the material there. It's funny, I went to Cornell University and these maps were put together through a Cornell University grant, but it wasn't until I visited the county historian's office that I came across them, and so that was really a rich experience for me, and completely, I think, led the direction of the project. In addition to that, the Superfund site profiles were incredibly helpful. The Olin Library Maps collection provided more maps than just those ones. The New York State global imaging data, which is all of these are publicly accessible. So really what I want to stress is that this is open to everyone, and that this type of research should be done and shared with everyone. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to access when you pull together from such disparate places different material, because this site really is so huge, and there's so many, there's so much that I wasn't even able to include, maps and photographs and manuscripts. So I really encourage you, if you are interested in learning even more than I was able to give you about this site, to definitely visit those archives, because they're all incredible, and the people who work there are all incredible as well. That's part of the reason I'm so happy to have this at the public library right now. Right, so I just want to move forward to just quickly talk about the process of making the prints that are on the wall here, and the prints of the maps that are out on the desk. So I work in two darkroom processes to make these prints. One of them is called Van Dyke Brown. It's a silver printing process. And the other one is called Gumdye Chromate, which is a pigment printing process. So Van Dyke Brown prints were how I was able to get the black and white information onto the image, and the gum printing process was how I was able to get the color information onto the image. And so after going to the Army Depot and making the visual material, these images, so I mean this image ended up becoming that print right over there, I would take them, digitize them, and make them into transparency material. And so the idea behind making the print is that when you lay the transparency on top of a paper coated with the process that you're working in, so this yellow paper in the middle was coated and had just been exposed with a silver solution. When you cover it up like this, only the areas that aren't dark, so that don't have this sort of, I mean, this is just a negative of this image right here, so the positive will be exposed onto this print, and then it's developed. Because I was working at such a large scale, the development process was a little unusual, the exposure process was a little unusual. I built a contact printer out of a shower door to expose them, and I would just wheel this palette outside, and so all of these are also sun prints. They're exposed with the sun.
Yeah.
And so this would be just the black layer of the print. And then I just had a couple videos of what the process of mixing the chemistry and developing the prints are. So this is, I had laid out all of the maps that are out on the library desk, and this is the process of developing them. So there's a few different solutions that you roll over the images to develop and fix them. And again, this is normally something that would be done in a darkroom tray, but because of the scale of the prints, the process of making them changed completely. In this image, or this video on the right, is just the process of mixing chemistry.
Can I just, did you have to build all of this? Or was this something that someone else was already using?
Luckily, I had access to the sinks, so that was that I didn't have to build, but I did have to build this sort of.
Seems very unusual how huge they are.
Yeah. It's my understanding that prints in this process at this scale don't exist. That people just have never printed at this scale because it just doesn't make sense for what the process
Yeah,
is.
just getting the paper.
Right. Yeah. So I would start from a very big roll of paper.
Yeah.
And just cut out part of the roll, and then my transparency material I would print out on the wide format digital printer to make that sort of physical. It's basically a sheet of plastic with an image on it.
So your digital printer, is that a Mac? Do you have?
It was I was printed from a Mac, but on an Epson printer.
Okay.
And then this is sort of the next phase. So after I printed the black and white layers, I would size them with a sort of, basically it's a protective layer of glue that would go on top of the print before I use the pigment process. And this is the same roller that I would then roll my pigmented emulsion onto. And so it's the same type of process. I would roll a new emulsion onto the paper. I would then put the paper in the sort of shower door contact printer and expose it to the sun. And over time, after doing many layers, so at least one layer for each of cyan, magenta, and yellow, but each of these prints has more than one layer for each of those colors to sort of gradually increase how vibrant it is. You would go out into the sun, expose it, and then bring it back inside and develop it. And they were developed in the sink, so I would just fill the sink up with water, and they're face down in that top right photograph. And the pigment that didn't get exposed would slowly trickle off of it, revealing the white paper again. I know this is sort of like a lot of technical information and a total twist from the historical background of the project, but I'm more than happy to talk more about this afterwards as well. And then I just want to point out, it's difficult to see, but in that bottom right picture, you can see this layer of yellow pigment that had been put on the print is reflective, so it's physically sitting on top of the print. It's not staining the paper. So with each of these coats and exposures would be a new physical layer of pigment that's on top of the print. And you can touch the prints on the wall lightly, and you can sort of feel a rough texture when all the pigment is built up. And after doing that, you end up with, this is just one of the other prints in the body of work that I put together. There are 7 prints in total, which I can pull up now. But that is all I have, so thank you guys so much for coming, and I'm more than happy to answer.
Can we see those a closer up?
Yeah. Yes. Let's see.
Have you exhibited your work?
Yes. This project originally was installed at the Soil Factory in Ithaca, which is like an eco arts center. They just work out of a big warehouse, and so they had a bunch of wall space for me to put all 7 of these prints up on. And then the map, which is on the front desk, was originally installed in Olin Library in Ithaca on Cornell's campus.
So I have a technical question. I took photography in high school, and we got to do our own, but it was black and white. And I know
Right.
we did black and white because it was simple. Is that how color prints are done? Is that layer by layer? Is that typical, or is this unique because it's so huge?
This is more broken down than what you would do with an enlarger when you were making a color print. So I imagine when you were doing black and white in the darkroom, you'd take your film, you'd put it in the enlarger, you'd expose it onto your paper, and you'd develop it. So the process for making color prints is fairly similar. It's still separated by color, but this process is a little bit more broken down in that for both color printing and black and white printing in the darkroom, you're buying paper that's pre-made that you can then use to print on. With this, you start with a blank sheet of paper and you make all of your emulsion from scratch, which is why it ends up becoming this repeated process of I'll put another layer of emulsion on, develop it, and the next day we'll come back and we'll do the same thing again. And so the images were really slowly built up after a few months of printing.
That's what I was going to ask you. How long does it take to do one of these? A few months.
I printed all 7 of them at the same time, so I would come in the morning and start printing when the sun rose because I had to use the sun to print, and I would get a layer on each of them by the time the sun set. So it's kind of, I just had to take the whole day, so it was weekends and other days that I had free time that I would come in. And then, yeah, I would say probably 2 or 3 months start to finish from printing, but there was a lot of prep work that happened beforehand to make the negative material and to go out and shoot the pictures and all that.
There's a place in Geneva called the Dove Block. Are you familiar with Arthur Dove back in the 20s?
I don't think so.
The painter George O'Keeffe came up and painted one, but in Geneva on the corner, as you come into Castle Street, right there is a brick building. It is now an art center, and it's called the Dove Project Block. In January, they're doing sun print. They do workshops. They pay for Mrs. Grant run. They would, and there's a gallery show every month. I'm one of the installers as well, but I would love to share more with you.
Yeah.
To get you
I would
get
love
your
to
work
reach out.
there, and Harold Kopp is the one who's doing the sun printing. He's our print guy.
Amazing, yeah, I'll absolutely reach out. Yeah, that sounds fantastic.